Okay, thank you for joining us for the second of these workshop and interactive sessions. And I'm going to make sure there is time for you in the audience to have conversations amongst yourselves. So if you're not sat next to someone, you might need to pair up with someone when we go into that stage. I'm very keen to hear your thoughts as well. The topic is the allies we need. How can we all provide support in inclusive workplaces? And I can't imagine a better panel to discuss this issue than my three colleagues on the stage. To my immediate right is Joy Burnford, who's author of Don't Fix Women and founder and CEO of Encompass Equality. Pauline Miller is next to her. She's Chief Equity Officer at Dentsu International, which I think I might say has a really cool building in Tokyo. Is that right?
Yes,
it's like that razor blade building.
Yeah, but I've not been, so now you're just making me jealous.
Well, I have been, and the reason I know it because I spotted it from the train. I was like, what on earth is that? And I realised it. Anyway, you're very welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
And on the far right of the panel, we've got Robert Baker, who's CEO of Potentia Talent Consulting.
Thanks, Anthony. And you're welcome to visit my hot desk anytime.
If I spotted it from a train. Good. Okay. Well, look, just a few words of introduction before I bring the panelists in. I mean, I was in a session just before this one in this room. Some of you may also have been on purpose-led organisation, which was absolutely fascinating. I mean, a really sort of passionate and wide-ranging conversation. And I guess what this panel is about the culture that flows from being a purpose-led organisation, if you like. There was a lot of talk in that session around intentionality and how do we ensure that the cultures of inclusion and purpose permeate throughout organisations. And one of the key mechanisms of that is thinking about the support you provide for each other through allyship and other mechanisms as well. And in terms of where we are, we look at a lot of the data and sort of the labour market, and we survey managers to take a sort of temperature check of where things are. And of course, there is a long way to go despite progress. Although there are only 1% more female managers now compared with 10 years ago. A survey that we haven't published yet, but I'll share with you this afternoon, is that only 17% of our managers believe their organisation is using gender pay gap data to make positive changes. And what's interesting about this, because in that Everyone Economy report's been discussed a few times, we recommend a whole series of things. One of them is collect the data, tell good stories, have an action plan, and so on. So what that tells us, I think, is that we're not connecting the dots at the moment. There's lots of things that are necessary in order to connect those dots. And I think you heard Heather this morning, or it might have been Tamara, say that 31% of male managers think that initiatives to support gender equality have gone too far, despite all this. So that's the barrier, but we all need to be in this together if we are to find a way through, and it's going to be our three panelists and you who are going to help us find the answers this afternoon. So I'm going to turn to Joy to begin with. Now, Joy, you're going to say a few words about how we should consider allyship from a more universal perspective.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm starting to sit here and I feel like I'm a bit too small because my feet are hovering off the ground here, so I'll just readjust myself. So as Anthony said, I'm the author of a book called Don't Fix Women, which was published last year, which provides a kind of practical framework for organisations in how to achieve gender equality. And it's been a fascinating day so far, and so many interesting themes coming up. I think the biggest theme I'm hearing today is kind of simplicity, and actually being a human being is really key in all of this. And that kind of leads into what I was going to chat about today. So when I set out to write the book, I was looking at it to think about how we can empower women and how we can get more women into leadership roles. But after all the research, I found that actually by doing what I recommend in the book, you don't just create a better workplace for women, you create a better workplace for everybody. So one of the challenges we face with efforts towards women's equality is that 53% of men feel they're being discriminated against. I know, Robert, you're going to be talking a little bit about this later, but in order to get men on side, I think we need to de-gender gender equality. and as I said, think about it more from a human perspective. Men and women are not homogenous groups. We know gender is not fixed. We know it's not binary, and we need to be really careful we don't lump people into different groups. I think there's a lot of, there are a lot of groups within organisations, ERGs and things, and I think it's really important to sort of keep coming back to we're all individual people and we all need different things. There are some men we know with misogynistic views. We know there are some men who act inappropriately sometimes or make sexist comments, and there are some that do very little to get involved in the home life. But there are now many more men that we're seeing who are keen to support and get involved as allies, but they're scared. They don't know what to do. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. We've seen all these things in the press recently. They're worried about their own careers, and if they start promoting women, what's going to happen to them? So I think, there's also very privileged women, like myself included. I'm not in the same situation as those with disadvantages, sexuality, ethnicity, disability, other socioeconomic backgrounds. So I'm very privileged, and there are other women like me. So we can also sometimes assume things without realising it. So you might assume, for example, that a woman who has children might want to work from home more. We've actually just come from a flexibility session. And actually, for me, I just desperately wanted to get into the office because I wanted to get away from the kids and the home life. So, you can assume things about different groups, but actually you might be completely wrong. So how do we tackle this? And I think there's two things we need to do. The first is about personalisation. And as I said, we need to treat everybody as an individual and not put people in boxes. We need to adapt our mindsets to think about the individual rather than the collective. And asking people and finding out what employees need, and training line managers in particular, this is something that we're seeing a lot about, is training line managers to know how to have crucial and curious conversations. The second is to assess the cultural frameworks in your organisation, which I talk a lot about in my book. And if you put in place these frameworks, as I suggested earlier, which include flexibility, allyship, and coaching, then you're going to be able to create a better workplace for everybody. And as I said, I really believe in practical solutions. So we remove the excuses of, I'm not sure what to do. So in the book, I talk about a 6-stage framework called SPACES, which stands for sponsor, pass on opportunities, act with insight, communicate with curiosity, engage in meetings, and set an example. So it's really simple. And again, this kind of thing today about simplicity, just get on with it. Stop talking about it, start doing it. And we're all leaders in this space. You don't have to be somebody at the top of an organisation. And we need to remember allyship is for everybody. It's not just about men being allies to women. It's as much about women being allies to other women and women being allies to men, in particular in the home. I've heard stories of men saying, I want to do more at home, but my wife always talks about, it's my kitchen, or come into my kitchen. And he's been sitting, at the school gates and not feeling very welcome. So I think we all have a place to play here in terms of being allies to everybody and being inclusive.
Brilliant, thank you, Josh. It might actually not coming into my kitchen. Anywhere near if I know it's a different thing altogether. Just before I go on to Pauline, it'd be good. I'm just conscious that we're talking about this word allyship, and it might be good just to get sort of a crisp definition, or for instance, of what allyship is from each of you. Maybe if I start with Robert and come down on that, then I'll come to Pauline.
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. Well, obviously, there's a kind of definition from a dictionary of allyship, which is basically a person who's not a member of a marginalised or disadvantaged group, but who suppresses support for that group and uses their power and privilege to support. So that's kind of like the dictionary definition. But I think it's basically really someone that understands what the issues are for everyone in the workplace, that wants to make a difference for everyone in the workplace. And so if you're a leader, obviously, it's particularly helpful because you can do that. And then I think it's actually taking action. So when I talk about allyship, it's often on this spectrum from being aware of the need to do something to sort of advocating and starting to speak up, etc. But then what we call kind of the agent of change is the place where we want to get most male leaders and most leaders, frankly, which is frankly doing the things that Joy was talking about, the practical things, and so I think you have to look at it in that sort of spectrum. We're just trying to get more of all of us moving to the agent of change end, because that's where things are really going to happen. And as we heard earlier today, we've got to speed up progress.
Thank you. What for you is allyship?
I don't think I could say anything different, so I'll simply just say it is effectively the ability to listen, to learn, to advocate and to support. And it's taking yourself as an individual and doing all of those things. And I'll talk about some of the tangible actions a bit later on, but it is about taking really tangible actions, practical things that actually make a difference.
Brilliant.
And I can't really add to either of those things, but in my book, I talk about gender allies matrix, and I try and sort of put people in different, I don't put people in boxes, because I've just said don't put people in boxes, but there are 4 boxes on this model. And it's really about the journey of where you, whether you take action and how you believe in being an ally. And it starts off in the bottom left corner, which is ostriches. And then it moves up to performers, where people, so ostriches are people who are putting their head in the sand and saying, I don't want to do anything around this, I'm just going to put my head in the sand and ignore it and hope it goes away. Then you've got performers in the top left who are doing stuff, but they don't really believe in it. So they're doing it because they want to put it on their CV, or they're getting rewarded for it in some way. And then you move people into apprentice, which is bottom right. And this is where people are really wanting to learn. And this is where we work with people, which is I really want to do something, but I don't quite know what to do. And then you have top right as champion. And this is where you've got people who are, doing this all the time. And you can be in different places at different times, and depending who you're being an ally to as well. I'm a great champion for gender equality, but when it comes to perhaps being an ally to somebody with a disability, I'm perhaps more in the kind of performer box. I don't know, and I think you can be in different places, and it's just understanding where you are and where you can get to is quite important.
We're big fans of apprenticeships here, so
Yes.
that's like a good place to get to initially. Pauline, I think Jo spoke very well about the need to be attentive to individual needs and differences and preferences and ambitions and desires, but equally we do know that certain responsibilities don't fall evenly, particularly between genders, for instance. So what role do men need to take in addressing these wider issues and challenges?
So I think, first of all, I'm going to change the question and say, what role do we all need to take in order to address some of these challenges? I'm also going to be very clear to say that when we talk about some of those responsibilities, we're often talking about childcare responsibilities, and we heard earlier on the Minister talk about childcare responsibilities. I have children, I'm not worried about them. 30 and 25 years of age. I don't know if I was but I'm thinking about my parents. I'm thinking about other caring responsibilities. We've got a generation that are going to be sandwich generations, and we actually need to think about the actions that we can take to be able to make it an easier opportunity for everyone. And when we think about allyship and we think about caring responsibilities, consider that actually if we could consider our men, for example, if we're looking at it in a binary format, and if they were also given the opportunity to participate in caring responsibilities, to have the policies in place that allow them to be part of a family unit and to not only focus on being the provider in the way that our structures are set up and our policies are set up, that they can also have an equal role, that will allow them to also create more equity in terms of decision makings in organisations. So in my previous organisation at Lloyd's of London, we neutralised family care policies. So whether you are the primary or the secondary carer, you equally had your independent right to 26 weeks full pay. And why is it independent? Because shared parental leave is a terrible system. It's not very easy to do. And unless organisations are willing to go one step further, that's a real challenge. Now, how do you get that in place? We needed a CEO who was willing to take the actions, the equitable actions that will then make a difference. And so if you consider that less than 20% of CFOs are women, if you're waiting for the women to make those actions, that's not going to be enough. You're going to need all of the CFOs, whether they're men, women or other, that you're going to need to be able to include all of them to be able to be part of the decision making, to put the policies in place that are financially driven. And so, the other area, another good example is in our current organisation, we have aligned our gender balance ambitions to all of our leaders. So our 1,000 leaders in our international business now have their reward compensation tied to the achievement of gender balance goals. And let me be clear, those goals are shared goals. So we either all win or we don't. And it's a real tough one when you're talking to a CEO in one country going, but I'm the only person at my level. So if I have to put a woman on at that level, then I might as well sack myself. That's not going to help. Actually, that's not what we're asking you to do. Asking you to buy yourself it if you wish to. What we are saying, though, is that all of us has a responsibility to, from an enterprise-wide perspective, to support the actions that need to be taken. And when we think about those actions, they can be small, because every small action will roll up into broader movement and progression. So whether that's sponsoring a woman, whether that's mentoring, whether that's not showing up to a panel that isn't gender diverse at conferences, whatever those actions need to be, considering to reward people that are taking the actions of being an ally, for example, in their performance reviews. Oh, what a novel idea. I did some extra work for the organisation to achieve gender balance and you didn't reward me for it. Hey, we could do that. So those are the types of things that we need to be doing that will enable us to move the dial. So I went all the way around in a circle.
And I think, taking bonuses away, I've heard a lot about that as well. Rather than giving people bonuses, it's actually bonuses being taken away, which seems to be making more of an impact. Funnily enough.
It certainly focuses the mind.
Yes.
Pauline, that was great, and loads of practical ideas there. And my own personal experience, the point about parental leave is a really relevant one. I happened to be in an organisation that had some generative parental leave, and I was persuaded. I hadn't even thought about doing it actually, and I did it. And I have to say, it was transformative for me and family life as a result. And I wouldn't have thought of it unless that mechanism being played. Someone was there to say, you should do this.
And talking about it is really critical. So not slinking away. I can tell you, when we put the policy in place, nearly all of the workshops were attended by men, asking, is that my leave now? I can take that, or is it shared parental leave? Is my partner going to have to give up their leave in order for me to take mine? The first person that took that leave was the Chief Risk Officer.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say. It really matters if the top leaders in the organisation actually walk the talk in this.
Absolutely.
Pauline rightly reframed my question to make it more universal. No, it was absolutely right. But I do want to ask a specific question of you, which is why should men be allies, and how can they do it well and authentically?
Right. Okay. Well, of course, just the terminology can be a little bit challenging anyway, because there's a big discussion around, is allies the right word? Do women need the kind of support that allies would? So maybe we should be using words like partnership or whatever. But let's put the actual term to one side. I think basically how I've come at it often is actually there's something in it for men to really engage in this. I mean, there is a fabulous Gloria Steinem quote about how actually men benefit from gender equality and their involvement in it, because it liberates them from the stereotypes that we have. We talked earlier about the stereotype of always being strong, not being able to cry, not being able to show our vulnerability, which is a major thing. So I think there's huge benefits for men in realizing that gender actually is men as well as women. Quite often they just see it just really as a female thing. So then it's thinking through, okay, so where have those benefits shown up? And when I look at my own life and my involvement in women's networks for many years and my involvement in gender equality, I'd like to think actually it's made me a better leader and a better human being. And we did a survey last year of 100 male leaders that are all doing these kind of roles. And that's the kind of thing that they were saying, that actually they felt that it gave them a better connection with others. I mean, one of the things that came out very strongly was that as a result of engaging in diversity and inclusion, they now felt their teams trusted them more and actually felt that they could communicate with them better. And, these guys were saying, now I feel much more able to challenge the status quo because of this work that I've done, which I think is great, because then we can ask, how things need to change. That they felt really that they were able to now express some of that vulnerability in their own style. I was on a workshop earlier with the guy talking about how when he first took on a new role, he felt incredibly vulnerable in taking on that new role, but didn't have a way to express it in a culture where vulnerability wasn't really seen as something acceptable. So I think there are huge benefits for men in doing this. And we do need the men to step up, because they're still a big chunk of the leaders and managers, and they can make a difference. A lot of research shows if men show up, this all moves faster. So I think there's something in it for them, something in it for everybody. So, what are we waiting for? Someone said earlier, it's urgent. We've got to get this this message out there now. We need everyone to show up as an ally, but we do need to get these male leaders in organizations really there as well.
Can Can I make a point on the urgency piece? So when I was writing my book, I interviewed David Schwimmer from, not that one, the other one, London Stock Exchange. And he was telling me a story about he was sitting at a conference and somebody asked a question, what are you doing around gender diversity? He said, oh, well, we're doing this, that, and the other, but it's going to take a long time. And apparently he said the look on this woman's face was just like, well, why is it going to take a long time? So from that moment onwards, he said, right, we're just going to start doing stuff. And I think that's the main message, as you say, it's like getting on, get some real practical action. Every single person, whatever gender you are, can do something to move the dial on this. So I think we've just got to get moving.
So we want some practical actions. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to the audience. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just partner up with someone near to you in groups of 2 or 3, partner or groups of 3. And it's got one question, because we want to get some practical input into this. So what is the number one thing we can all do to ally, and take Robert's point around the terminology, but we'll stick with it for now, to ally with others to create a more inclusive workplace future? The one thing we can all do to ally with others. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes or so to have a conversation with someone near to you. And I'm going to ask for a few of these ideas to be shared with the panel, and they're going to respond afterwards and share their reflections on some of the ideas that come forward. So how about that? So give us 10 minutes and I'll bring us back into the conversation. Thank you. As soon as we went into that interactive part of the session, the room sort of burst into a cacophony of conversation, which hopefully is a good sign, unless you're all talking about Eurovision. But anyway, we've got Craig over this side of the room, Janet this side of the room. I'd really love to hear your ideas. I think this is a moment for sharing. So I'm going to just invite you in from the audience. So put your hands up if you want to share your idea for the number one thing that we can do to ally, we can all do to ally with others to create a more inclusive workplace future. Thank you. Janet, I've got some on the screen as well, and I'll draw those in.
I think John Kerner, here with my own portfolio career, but have been an active CMI ally since about 2016. The discussion we were having, sort of the common theme that really came out was maybe refining the language that we use around inclusivity, actually being better together and bringing people in to create a higher performing team and explaining things in terms of benefits and values that derive from that, rather than sometimes the harder to reach audiences that look a little bit like me sometimes, seeing it as a threat or seeing it as a single platform issue that doesn't relate to them.
Great, thank you. I relate to some of the things that Rob was saying earlier on. If you could say your name as well, that'd be great. Thanks, Janet.
Hello, Donna Kennedy. So I think the most important thing for me, with us all being allies to each other, is to be committed to educating ourselves around the topics. Because once you're an ally once you've learned how to be an ally generally, you can be an ally for any reason, but you have to educate yourself on that topic. So whether that's anti-Black racism, whether it's gender, disability, you need to go with an intention to actually be educated in it and do that yourself, not rely on other people to educate you.
Brilliant. It sounds like you're really speaking from experience. And how have you gone about that through conversations, just openness, or have you looked sort of further in more depth around some of the tools and resources that are available? Yeah,
definitely. Well, I've read Joy's book, which was excellent on the topic of gender equality, so I would recommend that to everyone. I read a really excellent book by Nova Reid called The Good Ally last year, which is around anti-Black racism. That was an exceptional read. I definitely am into self-development, so I'm always doing some sort of course or reading. Connecting with people on LinkedIn has been very, very informative as well. So just seek information, but also talk to people and take a curious approach. So I'm a director of people and culture. I do a lot of talking to people in the business and all of the businesses I've worked in, and just being curious and empathetic as well is helpful.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for sharing what worked. That's really helpful indeed. Next door to you.
Hi, I'm Louise Walker. I work for BNP Paribas. So BNP Paribas is a huge organisation. So I think we are always trying to build an allyship culture, and there's many ways that we try and do that through our employee networks and having sponsors of that and real visibility with senior leaders. But what we were talking about is what we can do as individuals. Personally, I just try and be visible as possible. I have privilege, and I know that in the organisation I work for. So I try and amplify others' voices as much as I can, and often putting yourself, I think, in difficult situations where perhaps you feel uncomfortable, or conversations where you feel uncomfortable. And I think that's really important to try and do that all the time. So I do that to try and show I'm here, I'm listening, I'm engaging, I'm willing. So it's a small thing I think that I can do, but it has a ripple effect.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And have you found sometimes that the converse of that sometimes necessary? Sometimes it's important to step away and allow others to step in to the space. You can fill the space very, very quickly if you feel the need to.
Absolutely. And I co-chair our gender network, and I have, because of my kind of day job, I work for the senior management, so I have a lot of access to a lot of people just by virtue of where I sit. And I think people, you can have a tendency that you can just lead things and you'll be the co-chair and you'll be the one up front and speaking to the senior leaders. And I really try not to just be that person. I really try and make sure I'm actually creating space for others and not just holding it myself because I'm there. So I do try really to do that, because I think that's another noticeable way of building that allyship and trust of others in you, that you're doing something on everybody's behalf, not just for yourself in your own personal kind of advancement.
That's really sorry if I sound like I was interrogating.
No, not at all. It's a good question.
It wasn't meant to come across that way. And yes, okay, please, thank you. Thanks, Greg.
My name is Tanya McCalman. I'm here with Lennox Learning and Development, and the three of us had a conversation around this, and so we've summarised it in 3 parts because 3 of us. So the first one was that we thought leading by example, so building trust through role modelling. And then the second was involving and empowering those who are not traditionally in spaces where they've been before to break stereotypes. And then the final one was being mindful about declaring allyship, which we thought was important. So taking time, just to echo what you were saying there about educating yourself, and then perhaps waiting a little bit to be invited to be an ally, rather than necessarily just stating allyship as well. Being mindful about who we're being allies to and are we qualified to be that ally. And that was it.
Thank you. And was there anything in your group when you talk about empowering others, were there any particular things that you felt had worked?
I'd have to hand over to Danny for that.
That's fine.
But we were focused, I think it was particularly around like caring. Yeah, do you want to?
Dani Ivanova. It was around my personal experience. I come from a family background. I'm Bulgarian, grew up in a family where the male was the male. He would go to work, come back, put his feet up, and the wife would do everything else whilst going to work. So coming to UK, meeting my husband, we have a completely different relationship. We've always spread anything between each other. He was my ally, I have to say. He's empowered me to go ahead and pursue my dreams. And I didn't even believe I can do. And now speaking in front of all of you, that's the first time ever in my life. And it's my first conference ever. So yes, that was my personal experience. And I think communicating with my husband and explaining the life that I'm coming from, he wanted to change himself, as he himself grew up in a household where the husband, again, was the one who is the breadwinner, and the wife will do everything plus going to work. So that's the personal experience. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate that, and resonates very strongly with what Pauline and Joy both were saying. Thank you so much. Any other? Yes, please.
I think as well, like, it's important to be an ally to people who aren't in the room at the time. So it's calling out certain language that might be being used, even if it's not offensive to the people in the room. And we talked about also like being an ally to, it's not just people with protected characteristics, it's people who might be new to your organization and people using acronyms and they don't understand, but they might not have the confidence to say, what does that mean? You know, being a bit more of an extrovert or something, you could go, sorry, could you just explain that for the people in the room that don't know what that means? I think it's just having that, it's being brave, but it's being that ally all the time, not just when it's visible to the people you're being an ally to.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. In the skills and learning sector, you can speak entire sentences in acronyms. You think at the front.
Hi there. Can't resist. Aviva Wittenberg-Cox. I've worked on gender balancing the business world for a couple of decades. So, Pauline, very happy to hear that. I'm not a big believer in allyship, neither the word nor the sentiment. And I think your example of get it on the leadership agenda and into leaders' bonuses is a much more effective way of actually gender balancing organizations. But my invitation to allyship is actually, look at this room. My invitation these days is to women to become better allies to straight white guys who we need to educate and harness for the gender balance we're trying to implement in organizations and governments everywhere. And we're not very good at it. I think we are often so busy talking about inclusion of everybody except the dominant majority in our organizations that we forget that they too will need educating, including, by the way, our sons. And I don't know about you, Pauline, but 25 and 30, and I'm still on it, and I was on it all.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Very, very strong points. Can we just hold the Slido up to the top, because I think there's some points about language here. To act as an ally even when they're not in the room. Points to be made. Transparent pay bands, promotion guidelines, backed by allied line managers. If we scroll down a bit further, yeah, I think it was, sorry, if you scroll up a bit to the point about language there. So there was some quick and easy language hacks. Girls undermine women's ability. Say women, if they have some sexuality, sexual orientation, don't just assume they're in a heterosexual relationship using wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, and so on. Move mother or father when not known, and use parent or caregiver helps to avoid stereotyping. I think these are all just things to be very conscious of in the conversation. You can unwittingly exclude very, very quickly, and I think there's a good point to see. Now, if we carry on scrolling down on the Slido, then after this, I'm going to bring in our panel to get their reflections on what they've heard and some final pointers. Encourage curiosity and conversations around what impacts people and what people want to learn about. Be open, honest, and inquisitive. Get to know individuals and understand their needs. That came up in our conversation earlier. Challenge barriers, communication to not promote inclusivity. Actively listen and participate in reverse mentoring programs. So there's lots of great ideas there. Lots of great reflections from your conversations here. And I'm going to hand over to my to the panel just to get their final reflection on what they've heard and some final pointers. I'll start with Robert.
Sure, thank you. Well, really great points that everyone's made. One of the things that I think, well, I spend a lot of my time talking to groups of men that look a bit like me, male executives in organizations that actually need to change. And I can bring my experience of many years in women's networks and working gender equality to help them think about that. Because some of them feel quite threatened and some of them not sure what to do or what's involved, etc. But when you start to confront them with certain things, it's kind of interesting because it does get them thinking. One of the things that I do, and Jennifer Brown, if anyone knows Jennifer Brown, who runs Inclusive Leadership Consultancy in the US, she runs this thing called the Circle of Influence, where you ask people to give the names of the 6 people that they would consult on an important decision. Okay, and then you ask them to write down the names, and you say, okay, now have a look. How do those names stack up in terms of gender, in terms of race and ethnicity, in terms of age? And a lot of people, especially my generation, end up with very similar kinds of folks like them. And so one of the things we talked about a lot is how do we widen our circle of influence? How do we get more voices into our everyday lives? And maybe that's a bit easier in London in some ways because it's a diverse city, but in some parts of the world, it's actually quite a challenge to get those other voices. So going back to this point about being curious and understanding what the influence and the lives of others are like, I think, widening our circles of influence is an absolutely critical thing that we can do.
Yeah, thank you, Robert.
You can make it easy. Ask what somebody needs. I think back to points and changes in my career, and I was asked whether I wanted to take a stretch assignment in the US. I was asked, not somebody presuming that as a single mother I wouldn't be able to go. Ask. I look now and think if somebody was to say, how could I be an ally to you now? I would say to them, I'm the only black member, the only black woman on the executive team of a major organisation for our region. ask what I need, and I'll tell you, I want to meet other C-suite black women who can be my partners. So ask, don't assume.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Enjoy.
So much amazing stuff coming out of this. So I think curiosity is a big one that I was going to mention. And as we talked earlier, I did it myself. Recently, I was curious. I was talking to a trans man at an event, and I was curious about his experience of going through the menopause. And I thought, do I ask? Do I not ask? And I was just sort of thinking, I'm going to put myself in a difficult position here because I didn't quite know how to ask the question. And I loved that experience. And I was very open and said, I might say the wrong thing. And actually, it's just about being curious and saying, if you say the wrong thing, it's fine. But people understand that. And I think it's not being afraid to ask. Something I shared with you was JP Morgan Chase have a great example, which is you only need 36 minutes to be an ally to a woman. You need 30 minutes to take her out for coffee. You need 5 minutes to congratulate her on a win, and you need 1 minute to speak up and talk about that woman's experience with other people. So I think if you can, that's a really nice way of thinking about it. It's just 36 minutes, and that applies whether it's to women, to others, in a minority. But yeah, I think it's quite a good thing to do, quite simple.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you all, Pauline, Joy, Robert, for a very rich set of insights. Thank you all for a very rich set of insights. My only final reflection is this stuff's really hard. As someone that's wrestled with this in different ways, and we all have, but I think sharing in this way openly and practical suggestions is really very, very, very useful. Because it's really hard to navigate. When should you step in? When should you step out? When should you not offend? When should you ask the question you ask? Which is to be, in a very, very authentic and open way. So keep on sharing ideas and practice and experience, and we'll all get better at this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.